Hey everyone, it's Brandon Bornancin. Happy Thursday. Your host of Sales Secrets of the Top 1%. And today I'm really excited to interview Chris Orlob, the CEO and founder of Conversature. Chris, happy Thursday. How you doing today?
My feet are above ground, so that's kind of what constitutes a good day for me at this point. So doing tremendous. Thank you, Brandon. How are you?
Awesome. Doing great. Doing great. So, Chris, we're really excited to have you on the show. I know you run a conversation intelligence software company that helps organizations improve sales close rates, improve, booking more appointments, converting more pitches to close deals, converting more call center success. And, you know, it seems like you've been doing that for a year or two. And I'd love to just hear a quick little background on who you are and how you got started in selling.
Yeah, so the long story, which is where I'm going to take you. Today, I describe myself as an outgoing introvert. So I'm like naturally introverted, but I've trained myself to be outgoing. And sales should have been like the last profession that I ever got into. I actually grew up a very shy and kind of inhibited kid. I wasn't so shy around like my family or my close friends, but like in high school, I was known as the quiet kid. But I also always understood the importance of the ability to sell as a practice in life, not necessarily just a profession, but a practice. So my dad was always in sales, and he kind of taught me early on to do some basic sales stuff.
What
Like
type of
we,
sales was he in?
so he kind of jumped around a lot. He sold hardware. I could go on for a long time. Hardware was probably like the core thing that he did. But my family lived at the end of a fairway on a golf course, and we had a fence in our
Awesome.
backyard. So the golfers would continually, and to this day they still do, they continually hit balls into our backyard. And when I was a little kid, I would collect them in the summer and I would sell them back to them. Not necessarily the same golfers. I wasn't kind of like that jackass kid who's like, give me 25 cents and I'll give you your ball back. But they just wouldn't bother to get them back. So I would collect this big bucket of golf balls, slapped a sign on my fence, and yelled at golfers as they were trying to concentrate, golf balls for sale, 25 cents each. So that's kind of where it started. That's the long story at kind of the beginning.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. So you started in sales, selling the golf balls when you got into the career, and then, you've got a deep history of working at InsideSales.com, one of the most prominent, inside sales platforms for sales prospecting. Like, tell me a little bit about, you know, that experience. So working at one of the fastest growing, high growth sales prospecting dialers, what was that like and how did that positively impact your success and you starting Conversature?
Yeah, so the golf ball story, I mean, that's what I did when I was like 8, 9 years old. That was just like my first experience with sales. But during college, I had a bunch of sales jobs to kind of get me through college. Like I sold home security alarms as an inside sales rep and did a couple like odd jobs. But after school, I went to InsideSales.com. And it's funny because my co-founder and I for Conversature, we've been friends for like 6 or 7 years. And at the time, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do for the summer before my next year of school. It was my junior year of school. And he tells me, I just interviewed at this place called InsideSales.com. Turns out it wasn't a great fit for me, but you should check it out for the summer. And I said, great. I expected to be there for like 3 or 4 months. Got hired as an SDR, and I ended up staying there for about 3 years. So I was at Inside Sales as an SDR for around 6 months, went on to an account executive position, went into a regional sales manager role after that. And the best way I can describe their sales culture is one of very high standards. They demand high performance. And some people are very intimidated by that. Some people get eaten alive in that culture, but I loved it. I loved being held to a higher standard. I felt the pressure sometimes, just like anybody else would, but if you don't like being held to a high standard, if you're not really striving for very high performance, that place will eat you alive.
Yeah, and when you say high standard, what does that mean? Is that just like high KPIs for the sales activity that you need to generate, or just being perfect with your messaging? What does that mean exactly?
It kind of boils down to discipline and not sloppiness within the sales process. So, I mean, the first part is just hitting your number. That's the given. They're going to hold you to that. But there wasn't really any sloppiness regarding how you worked your deals tolerated. Meaning, if your sales manager was asking you about a deal and you told them there was some economic buyer that you have not yet called, but you knew about him, he would kind of be like, why the fuck aren't you talking to him yet? Like,
Right.
That's not what we do here. We cover all the bases. So that's like a very specific example. Sloppiness just wasn't tolerated there. And I loved it because it created really strong sales habits kind of from the beginning for me.
Yeah, it sounds like you got to have the total knowledge of those accounts fully mapped out, every decision maker, key influencer, user, you name it, build relationships with those guys and be prepared to hit it. When I think of InsideSales.com, I mean, before I was a customer, I would get called by them like every 3 days, every 5 days. So it seemed like they were just always hitting the volume. What were, because you went from SDR to, full-fledged manager and now running your own sales calling software intelligence company. What were like the KPIs there? What was it like on a daily basis? Were you guys all phone only with your outbound sales prospecting? Like, give us a look under the hood at your experience at one of the most prominent, IPO'd companies or soon to be IPO'd companies.
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the role we're talking about. So like on the SDR perspective, if we want to look at or under the hood, so to speak, at what a day in the life looked like for them, it was call heavy. It wasn't exclusive using the phone. They used email and social and all that kind of stuff. In fact, Ken Krogh, the president and founder of InsideSales.com, he's a huge social selling advocate. He calls himself a social selling missionary. So while it wasn't like as social oriented and email oriented as many SDRs out there, in that most of them don't even call nowadays, it seems like, they still incorporated that into their process. So they also had it split up into different segments at the time, like SMB SDRs, mid-market, enterprise, and it just depended which segment you were on. If you were an SMB guy or gal or an inbound guy or gal, you're probably making 100 dials a day alongside all of your email and social activity, and that would kind of reduce as you went up market as an SDR. On the account executive side, it was a lot less busy. It wasn't like daily activity. It was discipline around how your deals were getting worked. So we used Miller-Heiman over there as a sales deal strategy methodology. And we would do what are called blue sheets a lot with our manager, which is essentially what you were talking about earlier, mapping out the deals. Who's the economic buyer? Who are the key influencers? What are the red flags in this deal? And we would do deal storming together. It was almost like a creative process with a lot of discipline and rigor added to it.
Wow, that's awesome. And for those that don't know the Miller-Heiman approach, can you just shed a little bit of light about that and the deal storming?
Yeah, so I say deal storming as a verb. I wasn't referring to the book. I actually haven't read the book yet. I'm looking forward to reading it. It's been on my list for a while, but haven't read it. Miller-Heiman's methodology, for the most part, let's see, the book I'm referring to specifically is The New Strategic Selling. It's not a tactical sales book. It's not going to teach you what to say on your calls. It's not going to teach you how to do a discovery call, nothing like that. It's how you work your deals in a way that optimizes the chance of the deal not falling through. So covering all the bases and doing the right things with each decision maker in a deal, identifying where you have strengths in the deal, where there are potential red flags and how to address those red flags, how you're going to competitively differentiate yourself. So it's bringing strategy to the deal level, nothing tactical, nothing like that. It's the best way I can summarize it is increasing the odds that your deal will not fall through.
Yep. Yeah. It sounds like that paranoia throughout the entire sales process. And if you're not paranoid about figuring out all those gaps in the deal flow, dude, it's happened to all of us.
Only the paranoid survive. Yeah.
We've lost deals to.
Yeah.
Awesome. No, that's great. So you got the discipline around sales development execution. You got the discipline around account management and working 6 and 7 figure deals from identification to closure, and then taking you to kind of like today where you're at with Conversature. Tell me a little bit about the company that you started. Why did you start it? And then I want to roll right into a really prominent question we see a lot in the headlines, which is cold calling dead?
Okay.
So let's just start off with like the background of, okay, you leave InsideSales.com and tell me a little bit about the sales intelligence platform that you've built.
Okay. So I'm going to rewind back to my senior year in high school. This is kind of where the seed for Conversature was planted. And this was like 2007, 2008, right in the middle of the Great Recession. My dad had been unemployed for 6 months, just lost his job. So our family was kind of struggling at the time. And so what he did was he sold coupon books door to door. That was like his way of making money in the meantime. But he ended up slipping on a patch of ice and he tore his ACL. So I come home from school one day to see my dad on the couch with his leg elevated in a cast. And I'm kind of like, well, what the hell are we going to do? Because obviously you can't go knock doors now. And he goes, I got a job as a quote unquote inside sales rep. I had never heard that term before. And I was like, well, what's that? And he said, it's just selling done remotely, typically over the phone. And I said, that sounds like telemarketing, but if you think that's the best thing for you to do, go for it, because we're kind of at our wit's end here. So initially, he gets this job on pure commission as an inside sales rep. Wow. And he's making barely enough money to pay our bills. He's making like $2,000-$3,000 a month tops. But the next year, he showed me his, I think they're called W-2s, right? Yeah, something like that. The following year, he had made $104,000. So awesome. That's not millionaire status by any means, but in 2007, 2008, in Utah, where the cost of living is pretty low, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's good money. And so when I got my first official sales job, I asked my dad what his secret was. How did he go from making dirt to making a 6-figure income in such a little amount of time? And he said every single day without fail, at the end of the workday, him and his manager would sit down and they would review a call recording together. They would do coaching. They would critique the call. What did he do well? What did he not do well? So so he kind of spotted this correlation of, at least for him, there was a positive correlation between succeeding as a sales rep and how many call recordings he reviewed, how critical he was of himself, essentially. And so when I left InsideSales.com, my co-founder and I kind of started off as like consultants. We knew we were going to do the software company, but we wanted to validate that there was demand for it, so we weren't pissing into the wind. So we weren't spending 5 years on something that nobody wanted to buy. And I'll try to make this as short a story as possible to get this question answered for you, but we were on the verge of getting fired from our first consulting gig because we could not figure out why this company's revenue was zigzagging so badly. That's all they wanted from us, was to figure out how or why this company's revenue was zigzagging. And there was no explanation. Leads were flowing, sales reps seemed to be executing in a disciplined way. But it turned out we looked at the spreadsheet that logged how many call recording reviews were done with the sales team. And there was a direct correlation between that month's revenue performance and how many call reviews and coaching reviews there were done with call recordings with the reps. So, wow. And we tested that for 3 months in a row. And it was, maybe this is a little bit anecdotal, but it was enough for us to be like, okay, I think there's something here. And that's kind of like the seed behind how Conversature got started. We wanted to bring leverage to the, sales conversation world and make salespeople more effective.
Wow. Yeah. And I'm curious, what's the percentage? 95% companies do not record and watch or listen to their sales pitches and sales calls. Like, me personally, I would assume it's pretty low. Yeah, so it's really low. I don't know what the percentage is. Again, this is all anecdote. This is just personal observation, but very few sales leaders review raw call recordings with their reps. And rightly so. I don't blame them for that at all. And the reason is a call recording is just raw material for coaching. That's like, a call recording is like
the tree to building a house. It's not yet timber. It's way too burdensome for a sales leader to manually listen to a shit ton of call recordings in an attempt to get visibility into what's happening on his or her sales floor. So our goal is to use machine learning and transcription technology and artificial intelligence to give sales leaders kind of a bird's eye view into what's happening on their sales floor's calls without them having to dive in so deeply and listen manually to every single sales call that's occurring. Most chief revenue officers or VPs of sales or sales leaders maybe have an hour a week to devote to manually listening to call recordings.
Yeah, and I would say it's probably potentially even lower than that. I mean, this is something that I know I've been wanting my team to do all the time, because we give them all the scripts. We train them on how to overcome all the sales objections, all the prospecting, the pitching, the closing, the booking of the appointments. But after that, I have no transparency into how it's going, how it sounds, outside of, here are all the calls being made, the emails being sent, here are the conversion rates. So, how would I use conversation intelligence to make sure that we're maximizing every conversation and converting all of those?
I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to back up a second and just kind of nail something on the head that you just said. And it's the problem that this kind of stuff solves. It's easier to understand the solution when you first understand the problem. And the problem can be summed up by asking a head of sales a very simple question. And that's, do you know what happened today? And I'm not asking you, how many dials did your reps make? Or how many emails did they send? Or how many leads did you guys generate and call on? Or how did your opportunities move through the pipeline? Not asking that. I'm asking something a lot more fundamental. I'm asking, do you know what happened on your sales team's calls today? Do you know the key inflection points that happen during their conversations that are going to influence the rest of the sales cycle with each one of those deals? Do you know what your reps are saying and doing on their calls? Do you know how customers are responding? Because if you don't know these things, how are we supposed to improve them? Like, how can we possibly improve something we don't have visibility into? So let's take it in terms of like the internet marketer back in the 90s. If you think of like the average day for the online marketer in 1995, they would create an online campaign, they would send it out into the internet world, and they would hope something worked out. They didn't have marketing analytics yet. They didn't know what people were clicking on. They didn't know what headlines were outpulling other headlines. But today, internet marketing is one of the most optimized disciplines in the entire business world. They can split test headlines, sales copy. They can tell you exactly what's working. And that's because they have this mega visibility that marketing analytics gives them. They know how to improve. They have a game plan for improving their campaigns. But sales leaders, we are tasked with improving our sales reps' conversation results without that visibility. We have a blindfold on. So what Conversature does, now that we kind of understand the problem, hopefully here, is it kind of X-ray vision into your sales team's calls, both at the individual level and at the aggregate level. So yes, we can analyze individual sales calls so that we can break them down for coaching purposes, but we can also analyze these calls in aggregate in kind of this X-ray vision type way so that we can understand key trends that are coming up and key insights, and even take some of the guesswork out of what actually works on sales conversations, like what Aaron Ross says, "Did I catch you at a bad time?" is the best phrase for SDRs to use ever. But that's purely based off intuition. Let's test that with data. Let's see what works better. Did I catch you at a bad time, or did I catch you at a good time? Or did I catch you at a decent time? How about we put data behind what actually works in a sales call instead of just guessing and having these sales holy wars where everybody claims one methodology is better than the other?
Right. I hate arguing about what works best without data, because without it, it's just another opinion, So I love the concept. And I guess as a busy CEO or VP of sales, how would I do that at scale? Because I don't have a lot of time either to look at transcriptions of calls.
No, yeah.
So I would see that. I'd be like, got to read through. I got to try to highlight where my reps did well, where my reps did not well, provide them feedback to improve next round. how do you kind of transcribe these pitches and calls and then provide those recommendations of improvement?
So transcription is the bane of my existence. And that is because it is the biggest misconception of what conversation intelligence software is. People hear transcription and they think it is transcription software, and that's what it does. Transcriptions, transcribing a sales call, has a means to an end. And that end is because we can now analyze the transcription for particular sales behaviors. So it's not like, we're asking CEOs or sales leaders, here's this giant ass transcription of a sales call. Go ahead and read it with your bottle of scotch at night in front of your fireplace. Nobody's going to do that. That takes way too much time. We don't get rid of the call audio. We simply bring in the call recordings into our call management platform, and we transcribe them alongside that. So now we can use the transcription in a few different ways. If we want to search for calls that, have a particular keyword or key phrase, we can do that and the call pops up. But really the transcription serves its purpose when our machine learning algorithms kind of go through it and analyze it for key sales behaviors, making sure our reps are hitting certain points in our sales playbook, if we have a sales playbook or a conversation playbook built. So transcription's totally a means to an end. Not asking anyone to read transcriptions in their entirety.
Got it. And then, so you guys can at scale kind of analyze, review, analyze, and provide recommendations for performance improvement to sales development reps, to account managers, to sales directors, you name it.
Yes.
Awesome. And to dive into that, you built this platform for sales calling and the calling industry. Talk to me a little bit about, is cold calling dead? Because if it is, then salespeople are in trouble. You could be in trouble. Let's dive into the topic. Is sales calling dead? People are now, still getting a ton of calls. I got like 50 before today. Each one of them I avoid just because, if they're not in my contact book, I ignore. We've got companies like Connect and Sell, Connect Leader, Conversation Bridge, whatever. We're blasting 5,000 calls in a call center. And then once someone picks up, they'll connect you. And that means that your prospects just every minute are getting pounded.
Yeah.
Conversion rates are lowering. I know it's a pivotal channel, and a part of our omni-channel sales strategy, we'll always do it. But what's your thoughts around, is cold calling dead?
So I probably have a lot of thoughts, but two initially come to mind. The first is I just want to make it clear that Conversature can be used for cold calling. It's great for analyzing cold calls, but that's not all it is. So like in any B2B sale, unless it's done face-to-face, are you still having a conference call? Of course you are. Unless somebody knows something I don't know and people are closing deals over social media and email and not actually talking on the phone.
95% of pitches are done via conference call.
Yes. So Conversature
and that's
is
without data.
Yeah. But it's probably an accurate guess. So that's my first kind of thought on it. I just want to make that clear that what we do applies to every conversation within the sales process. Now, here's the real thought that you were looking for is, so Seth Godin has this concept called the lizard brain. And the lizard brain is the amygdala in our brains it's wired for millions of years ago when we lived in the jungle and we had to worry about things like saber-toothed tigers eating us. And we had to worry about what we were going to eat that day. That's what our brain is wired for. We've evolved past that, and civilization, is a thing now, but our brain hasn't caught up. So now instead of being scared of saber-toothed tigers and what we're going to be eating that day, we're more scared of things like, what do people think of me? Or we're scared of things like rejection. And kind of like civilized fears. Our lizard brain has to have something to be afraid of. So the reason I talk about brain science, besides the fact that I'm super nerdy and I love studying brain science, is I think the lizard brain is behind this whole idea that cold calling is dead. I think when a young SDR comes into the workforce. He's maybe, or she is maybe 23 years old. And they're kind of apprehensive about making cold calls to begin with because it's scary intrinsically. Then they see some thought leader on LinkedIn saying cold calling is dead, and it becomes justification in their mind that they don't have to do it. But the reality is, cold calling alongside other prospecting channels like email and LinkedIn and Twitter and social and all that kind of stuff is one of the most effective ways to prospect. It forces a conversation. You know, people, I won't ever say anything bad about the other prospecting channels because they're all effective, but they're all more effective when used together. So that's kind of my thoughts. First of all, cold calling by itself without any of the other tools, very ineffective. But second of all, every one of these channels becomes more useful when they're combined. It's like 1 + 1 + 1 = 10 instead of 1 + 1 + 1 = 3.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy. I agree. I remember starting off in sales 10, 15 years ago. I mean, everyone's pretty scared of picking up the phone and rocking and rolling on that. I mean, you don't know what to say, how to say it, how to overcome. I'm not interested, no budget, already working with someone, send me more info, not, you name it. But that's really where we come into play. And
yeah. And if you haven't created the habit of overcoming fear 80 times a day, your lizard brain, your amygdala, is going to be screaming at you to put the phone down and just send an email instead. It is going to do it's going to kick and scream until you finally make it a habit to just say, shut the fuck up. I'm going to make this cold call, and then I'm going to make another one, and another one, and another one. But I'm also going to send email and social and all that good stuff in between.
What do you think? Because I totally see the value of Conversature in pitching, with all of my client directors and whatnot, sales directors. When it comes to prospecting on the phone, this is something that I seriously worry about with these auto dialer companies that farm out the call centers and then connect to you when someone picks up, because my concern is that prospects are going to be getting pounded so hard that they're going to avoid picking up the phone 24/7. What are your thoughts? Like, have you seen that? Like on LinkedIn, Connect and Sell will post, oh, we made 11,000 calls today and had, 100 connections. And the first thing I think of is, hey, that's 0.001% conversion rate. So your conversion rates are dog shit. Not to trounce or put down the technology. The technology is amazing. I'm more concerned about the overall macro effect that it's going to have on sales. And I mean, at Seamless, we're trying to teach Seamless how to make cold calls and how to make prospecting calls for companies, which is also scary. Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts around the whole this
diminishing effect of people answering the phone? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, because I mean, you can see it get a little crazy, right? Like LinkedIn. Now LinkedIn's starting to turn into a spam trap with all these memes, and it reminds me of Facebook and other social networks that are just kind of trashed with garbage after the majority of the population joins.
Yeah.
And I kind of am a little worried about that happening over the phone.
I think that's a valid concern, especially when it comes to cold calling. I think people do answer the phone less and less. I'll be the first to admit it too. I'm just like you in that even if somebody is calling me and they're in my address book, I oftentimes don't even answer that because I just want to, respond via email or something like that. Now, I will say this. I think it depends on your market. I think, and I would use data to back this up. I wouldn't just guess for all the listeners out there. But for example, if you're calling on chief marketing officers or VPs of sales, calling them might actually work. They tend to be more sociable people who like to have conversations with people. But I've talked with other companies who say, hey, we don't even pick up the phone. We're an SDR organization. We don't even have phones because we sell to like developers and they don't want to talk on the phone. And
developers rarely pick up the phone.
Yeah, and I have no argument against that. I say, do what your market wants. Don't cold call just because you're prideful in being good at it. Like if your market doesn't want cold calls, don't do it. But if your market responds to it, then do it.
Yeah. Figure out the ideal personas and then how do they want to be communicated
And
to.
I'll also say this, like aside from cold calling, like maybe I'll get lynched for saying this, but marketing's job, not job, but marketing's aspiration should be to make cold calling unnecessary. You know, it's not always possible, especially like in a startup where it's going to take years to get demand generation traction. But like at InsideSales.com, at the time that I was there, they were generating 6,000 marketing qualified leads per month. And they would have an inbound SDR team constantly calling on those leads, and people answered, you know, their connect rates were through the roof. So yes, like there's probably a diminishing effect when it comes to cold calling specific to people actually answering the phone. But if you're generating a lot of leads and they're qualified leads, I would be appalled to see somebody not using the phone, calling on their inbound leads.
It's a required channel. You got to use it. You got to use it with everything else. Like you had mentioned, 1 + 1 + 1 equals 10 versus, 3.
Yeah.
The impacts there, it's going to be big, unless you're targeting an audience that just doesn't feel it.
And there are companies who have these demand generation machines going, but the sales leader, like in some of these companies, the sales leader is so prideful in cold calling that he or she demands that they have a cold calling team anyway. And my whole thought is like, why the hell would you do that? Like just if you're generating so many leads that you don't know what to do with them, scrap the cold calling. Like even me, like as an entrepreneur, I do significantly less cold calling now than when we started Conversature because we have demand gen campaigns online going through like Facebook and LinkedIn and other channels. And every time we generate a new lead or a new MQL, I get a little Slack notification and I just call them up. And I get a few of those every single day. And unless I'm trying to find something to do, which every now and then will happen, like every couple of weeks, I won't cold call. When I've run out of leads to call on, like inbound leads, now I'm going to start, using like LinkedIn Navigator and going after cold prospects. That's particularly true with like bigger accounts because you don't see a ton of enterprise customers coming inbound.
Yeah, no, I love that. Aligning sales and marketing to just maximize the SDR and sales team's results makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, a lot of companies, they don't have that big inbound funnel where it's just like InsideSales.com, but and that could be leveraged as a crutch, right? That could be used as a crutch. I don't need a prospect because we've got a ton of inbound, and we definitely want to make sure everyone's just cranking on it regardless. But one of the things, because you analyze thousands of sales calls and scripts and kind of call tape, I like to say, and like sports, watching the sports tape and film. Number one sales secret. I'm going to ask you two questions here, and this is really because we're working on a book. But top failure, which of course, optimistic salespeople, top learning experience, not failure. But to get right to the point, top failure in sales, and then top sales secret for the audience. What would you say are both? And you can pick either one to start with.
I actually have great answers for this, so I'm glad you asked. And I want to preface both of these with just saying this has been an observation of looking at anonymized data. We've only been around for like 15 months, so we don't have enough data quite yet to conclusively say what works and what doesn't in certain scenarios. But here's what tends to fail. Us sales professionals are grown up being trained that we should get the prospect saying yes. We should ask small questions that, get little yeses along the way to our close. And there is almost a negative correlation between that and the success of a sale. And it turns out there's actually a psychological reason behind this. And that is when we are asked questions that are attempted to force a yes, it makes us feel like some of our personal autonomy is being taken away. Our personal freedom is being threatened. But if you ask questions that are designed to force a no, you're much more likely to get agreement. because people kind of sit back, relax, they feel like they're in control of the situation, and they suddenly become more agreeable. They don't feel like they're backed into a corner. So an example of that is saying, instead of asking a closing question, this is a bad example, but instead of asking like, can we get this signed right now? You should instead rephrase that to, is there any reason we couldn't get started right now? And suddenly the prospect doesn't feel any pressure, and they'll probably say yes, unless they weren't actually ready. And then you bring up some concerns that you can tangibly deal with. So that's kind of like the biggest failure / misconception that I've witnessed. One of the biggest successes that I've noticed, and this is like just pure gold as far as how to make your discovery calls more effective, is
and just to dive into that one kind of learning experience or failure, is it because, it's kind of like a condescending question, like, hey, Chris, it's Brandon over at Seamless. I'm sure you're always trying to improve your prospecting results, right?
And you just want to say like, no, that's you just want to say no. Like I wrote a blog post about this a couple days ago, and I was called by a telemarketer selling home security, which I actually used to do a long time ago. But he was like, do you want to keep your family protected? And I'm like, yes. Like, sigh, yes. Do you want to prevent people from stealing your belongings? Yes. And finally, like the third one, it had been a long day, and I sometimes can come across like aggressively, so give me a little bit of a break here. But he said something like, do you want to prevent any intruder from ever entering your house? And I responded, no, my shotgun's getting kind of dusty, so I could put it to use. And I just hung up on him because I was sick of dealing with it.
Yeah.
Again, give me a break, because I shouldn't be so hard on like young sales professionals like that. And I normally do hear them out a little bit. But yeah, like when you're asked a question that's designed to get a yes out of you, your sense of autonomy goes down. And that lizard brain, the amygdala that we talked about earlier, it just starts flaring up. But when you're asked a question in a way that gives them an option to say no, they're much more likely to agree. Totally counterintuitive.
Yeah. Wow. That's a great tip, and something that, I think a lot of the audience would benefit from. How do you do that? I'd love to hear, in future posts, if you could share a little bit more about asking those questions.
Here's one specific, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have to get this out to your audience. Anybody listening in an individual contributor role right now probably has a deal in their pipeline that has quote unquote gone dark. Send this one-line email to them. Have you given up on this project? I can almost promise you that they're going to respond. They won't ignore that.
Huh. Have you given up this project?
Have you?
What would you say? What would you say the subject line would be?
I would write the subject line as, have you given up on this project? And then I would write the body just identical. Just, have you given up on this project? And I've used that a ton of times, and I'll have people respond all the time. No. Sorry, we have not given up on this. We've just been swamped. How about we talk Tuesday at 9:00? Boom, right back on the calendar.
Yeah, it's great. Super easy to respond to. If they get it on their mobile phone, they could quickly respond, whatever it may be. That's great. Awesome. Okay, so we covered the learning experience / failure question. And when it comes to the top sales secret, and of course, top salespeople, they have an arsenal of things that they could pull out of the hat, pull out of the war chest. But the biggest number one contributor, sales secret, sales strategy, if you had to tell your 20-something-year-old self, what would that be?
Those are two different questions. So if I had to tell my 20-something-year-old self, some advice, I would say read more than you currently are. Like, honestly, that would be my advice. I'm a huge believer that there's a huge correlation between reading and learning and long-term success. But I do want to talk about this little tip. This isn't probably something, that's like going to make or break your sales success. But for the people listening who are trying to like look for this new technique that's going to help them a little bit more, here's what I would say. The typical discovery call is a sales rep asking questions and continuing to ask questions. Maybe sometimes they'll do a summary to make sure the prospect feels understood. But either discovery calls sound like an interrogation or a back and forth between asking a question and doing a summary. And eventually you do so many summaries that you seem inauthentic. It starts to seem like a technique. So after you ask a discovery question, try this. It seems like you, and then fill in the blank. And your prospect will continue talking without you having even asked a question. So this probably isn't a great example, but let's say I ask a discovery question. The prospect spends 20 seconds answering it, talking about their company. And instead of me responding with another question, I say, it seems like you're incredibly passionate about the industry you work in. And then just pause. And they will go on and on and on. So the key is, it seems like you, and then label an emotion that you've identified in talking with them.
Okay. Very cool. Great tip. Great tip. So it seems like you, Chris, are incredibly passionate about
I'm so passionate about this
conversation intelligence space. How do salespeople that are watching this, how do companies that are viewing this video get involved? How do they connect with you, and then how do they get set up and rolling with using conversation intelligence?
So I'm happy to actually take everyone through a personal, not everyone, but I'm happy to take whoever inquires through a personal demo myself. And if you go to Conversature.com, you can request a demo. That's CONV as in victory, ERSATURE.com. And they can just request a demo there. Happy to take them through it. The implementations look like just, any other sales stack implementation you would see with like a Sales Loft or a dialer program. So a few weeks. One of the most important kind of messages I just want to drill into everybody's brain that we're a huge believer in over here at Conversature is that the sales leaders of tomorrow know what happened today. The sales leaders of tomorrow are not going to be blind to what's happening on their sales floor.
Wow, that's great. That's a powerful quote. The sales leaders of tomorrow know what happens today.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And that's like kind of pulling off the Band-Aid of good or bad, I know what happened.
Yep. And
if
it's bad, you definitely want to know it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like I work out, I don't want to get on the scale to weigh myself. I always try to avoid it because I just smash 10 cookies or whatnot. But if you do it and you hold yourself accountable, every day you make better, smarter, strategic decisions. The same with conversation intelligence and analytics to improve your sales outreach. I love it. Well, hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. Chris, I appreciate joining the call today. Truly appreciate it. Everyone that's watching this, check out Conversature.com. Sign up for your free trial. Chris will walk you through a demo of the platform, and we hope you found this clip of value. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Brandon Bornancin, your host. Sales Secrets of the Top 1%. Make it a great day.
Thanks, Brandon.